Hi guys, today I'm going to describe how to categorize a risk. Risks are something that may or may not happen. They are uncertain. The way to categorize them is A, on how likely they are to happen from 1 to 100%, and then looking at their impact. So I'll describe how to use a graph and how to look at these and compare them against each other. When you assess the risks, you look at it on a two-way scale. Hopefully I'll manage to draw one to the left. On the y-axis, you have the severity. So if it's really severe, that could be a nuclear explosion that kills everyone. At the bottom of it, it may be that it just costs a couple of £100. And then you'll have a whole scale in between the two. On the x-axis, you have the likelihood. So for example, the nuclear explosion, while it will be catastrophic if it happens, it's very unlikely, so it's the sort of risk you probably wouldn't even put on your risk register because there's nothing you can do and you're not going to put any budget towards it. But then think about a £100 sort of risk, or maybe one that will put the project off by a couple of days. So a windy day, which means that you can't work on your project. Yes, it only puts the project off by a day or maybe even a few hours. But if you're doing this in a season where it's very windy or somewhere where it's very windy, this could be highly probable, and you know it probably actually will happen lots of times. This then means you can categorize the risk. So in the bottom corner, you have the highly unlikely risks that are also a low impact. So things which are barely ever going to happen, and if they do, not much will happen. You may decide to actually ignore them. If anything goes in that corner, you may say, look, we're not adding that on the register. It's not worth the time in managing them. That gets offset by any positives you may get by managing them. Then in the middle, you've got risks which are medium likelihood, but also a medium probability. These risks, you all manage differently because they're more likely to happen. They're kind of in the middle. And then in the top corner, you'll have the ones which are high probability and high impact. Now really, you don't want any of these risks, and if you have them, you need to kind of almost put them into your plan. You need to really mitigate against them so they either won't happen or you can lower the impact. Now you've got the other corners. I've already talked about the ones which are high impact but unlikely to happen, and the ones that are very likely to happen but very low impact. You've also got sort of the other four boxes which can be looked at or where they are on the scale basically. The way you decide what counts as high, medium and low depends on the project, it depends on the budget, it depends on your risk budget, it depends on the conventions of your industry, and that's something that you need to set up in the initiation stage of your risk management process. Next, you do need to look at the impact, and the impact can be in three different ways usually. Firstly, cost, secondly, time, and thirdly, quality. And quality can also include things like reputational damage, stuff like that. It's quite hard to measure the three against each other, so something that affects quality and then you look at something that affects time, it's really hard to judge the two, so quite often you'll turn everything into cost, because if you think about it, if something takes longer, that will add a cost. If something is a lower quality to fix it, it's a cost. So sometimes people just put everything in cost, but a lot of the time you'll have those three different categories. So once you've put it on the graph, once you've worked out where it's cost, quality or time, you may also do a 3-point estimate, which I'll talk about in another video. You make sure you've described the risk properly. Again, I'll do another video about how to describe risks and describe their impacts as well as their causes. And finally, you've got it in the register. And then you can start looking about the response actions, how you're going to respond to each risk. It's also worth sort of looking at the responses once you've already put a pile of risks in, because then you can categorise and prioritise which ones you want to look into first. So, what did you think on my very quick video on how to assess a risk? Do let me know, comment below, and goodbye.